I just want to do God's will.
The kind of revolution that the world needs is a Christian revolution.
If you want a miracle, you've got to expect it to happen.
You are the recipients of God's grace and God's blessings, and you rejoice in that reality.
Welcome to Life Today Live. Hope you guys had a great weekend. We're going to kick off Monday talking about something that I enjoy. I am a fiction book reader, and my tastes are a little different. They're a little different. And so I don't do a lot of fiction interviews, but today's guest intrigued me, and so we're gonna talk through it. He has a book out he has several books out actually, but we're going to talk about one today called The Light, and well, it's got an interesting setting, interesting story, and I find it quite interesting. So you're invited to be a part of the conversation if you're watching us live. Chat is open on the chat-enabled channels. And would you welcome with me a gentleman by the name of Buck Storm. Buck, good to see you, man.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So with my slightly offbeat and ambiguous introduction, in your own words, how would you describe your writing as well? Not just The Light, which is not your typical book, but some of the other ones, like Venus Sings the Blues, Truck Stop Jesus, and some of those. How do we position what you do?
Well, I write what I like, generally, what I like to read, but I write what some of the publishers, for lack of a better term, have called a literary Americana. It's some of my books take place in a small town in Arizona. I've got a series that kind of wanders through that desert atmosphere, and it's kind of like watching. My books are kind of like watching old films. I think that it's I sort of describe the pictures in my head, and there's some humor, and hopefully there's some depth. Definitely not your typical Christian fare, I wouldn't say, but I think as an artist or as a writer, I've been a musician for years. That was kind of my upbringing, and then into books. I think whatever your art form, your heart is going to somehow come through. And my heart has been for years the miraculous realization that God is faithful to me even in my faithless days. And so that's, I think, the underlying message in my books, whether or not it's spelled out completely clearly or not. I think that's what people walk away with. The Light is a little bit different. It's a fictional account, or not a fictional, a biblical fiction, but it's the account of Christ's, of the early believers' experience from the resurrection to Pentecost, those 50 days, which is an incredible time to write about. I really, really enjoyed that.
Yeah. Okay, so I won't get too nerdy on the writing side, but what's the most important thing to you? Character, action, or dialogue?
Man, I don't think you can lift one of those up. I can tell you what I enjoy the most out of those. I love dialogue. I'm a huge Hemingway fan. Nice. Salinger, some of these guys that use dialogue in amazing ways. One of the things I love about Hemingway, and I talk about this a lot if I'm ever in like writing environments, is that you could read a sentence of dialogue of Hemingway and see years of backstory in a character. And I think that's what great writing is. So I think dialogue's very important, but characters to me are, they drive the story, and their pain and their joy. If you can live that with them, that makes a story great. So yeah, character, action, you got to have something that happens, right? Yeah. So somebody has to get into some trouble and figure out how to get out of it. So yeah, I think they all kind of meld together. But as far as what I enjoy, I love writing dialogue. That's one of the things I love, and I think one of the things I'm known for in my books.
Nice. Have you been to the Hemingway house in Key West?
I have, but it's been so long ago, I can't even tell how old I am.
Nice. All right, on to The Light. Let's get into some of the story, and then we'll talk about some of the potential landmines in writing biblical fiction, because not everybody appreciates all that. Walk us through some of where you're going in the story and some of the characters.
Well, so this book kind of springs out of another book I wrote called The List, which follows Christ's journey through the 3 years of ministry. I introduced a couple characters from the Bible. Nicodemus was, the Pharisee that went and saw Jesus by night, and Joseph of Arimathea. The reason I even picked this up, I was asked to write this book, and the reason I even was interested was because you have Joseph of Arimathea, a Sadducee, a wealthy guy, arguably a Sadducee. I believe he would have been a Sadducee, and you have Nicodemus, a Pharisee, coming together to take Jesus's body off the cross. This is like Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton joining forces for something greater than themselves.
True.
Only more drastic at the time. And so I thought that was a fascinating story there. I love the 50 days following the resurrection isn't something that people generally write about. But if you think about it, man, this is like there's science fiction happening in this. So you've got the ascension, Jesus rising up into the sky from the Mount on Bethany. You've got the graves opening up and people walking out of them, and what would that have been like? I mean, your Uncle Charlie's knocking at the door. He's been dead for 10 years. You don't know. I mean, what an amazing thing to write about. Lazarus on the scene. You've got Pentecost itself, a day that changed the entire world. And through all this, you have the oppression of Rome's boot on the neck of the Jewish people. You've got the Jewish elite that are oppressing their own people, denying that Jesus Christ has risen. Then you have an empty grave and no body. And so where is this guy? And at the same time, this is your hope. This is your life if you're an early believer, but everybody's trying to kill you. So I thought it was an interesting, it's a great setting to write a story against. And I really enjoyed it.
You've also got people thinking that Jesus was coming back to boot Rome out and set the Israelites back in charge, in a physical kind of nation, and that wasn't happening either. You talk about a conflict, which is key to a good story. There's a little bit going on during this time.
Oh yeah, I mean it almost writes itself, really. It's amazing. Yeah. The Jews were expecting a military Messiah. They were looking for somebody to lead their army, and many Jews still are looking for that same Messiah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it was, and so this is people had to be scratching their heads, and at the same time hiding in holes, and they've lived. If you're brave enough, or you have enough conviction to stand up and say, I do believe that this is the Messiah, was the Messiah. You're losing everything: your business, your family, your place in the synagogue. I mean, you're giving everything up to follow this man.
The character Joseph of Arimathea, what do we know about him? I mean, a little bit from Scripture, but not a whole lot. Are there any other source materials about this guy out there?
There's very little about Joseph of Arimathea. You have some clues, which I found interesting. Obviously, he was he was wealthy. He had his own tomb carved out. There's a wine press there. In my book, this is complete conjecture, but I make him a wine grower, a grape grower, a vineyard owner, and a winemaker in the book. We know he was wealthy, lived on the on Mount Zion in the wealthy area. The upper city is what it was called in the first century, close to Herod's palace. That's good. Herod's palace. And so he had access to Pilate. He was able to walk in and talk to Pilate. That was pretty unusual. So we know he was a man of influence, wealth, and had a voice. He was part of the great Sanhedrin, the 70-man body that ruled religiously in Jerusalem. We know he would have been a scholar. He would have been studying the scriptures. He would have had an inkling, if he was paying attention, of when the Messiah was going to show up. We know this from Daniel's scriptures and Daniel's timeline. So yeah, there's some things we can guess about him, and then there's also some things we can make up, which is what I did. But I mean, I think it's as good a guess as anybody else, and maybe somewhat of an educated guess. So
okay, so now we step into one of the landmines. When you start talking, I mean, we've seen the criticism of The Chosen,
Yeah.
And I love exploring with as much historical knowledge as we have, which is often very little, like you say, but exploring some of these other sort of peripheral characters. You start putting words in Jesus' mouth, I can see how people get a little upset.
Right.
But I mean, you're talking Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea. How do you write about biblical characters in a fictional way that doesn't get you in trouble?
I don't know that you do. I'll tell you though that my goal with both of these books was to keep things. I've been to Israel many, many times. I've walked, driven, seen, Jerusalem, the entire country, stem to stern. But so I wanted to keep things geographically accurate, especially writing in the old city, Jerusalem, which is an amazing backdrop to that. The first century Jerusalem was spectacular. I mean, you've got the largest man-made platform on the Temple Mount of recorded history at the time. Just the temple itself was amazing. The upper city, Herod's palace, incredible place to write about. And I kept that very, very accurate. I've talked to a lot of people. Over the years, I've had been very, very blessed to have access to people a lot smarter than me. And so I would quiz them and drill them as I was writing. Randall Price's to Rosebook Temple Guide is great. I use that quite a bit. Had Josh McDowell read books and Dr. Dave Reagan right there in Texas, who's a friend and an amazing scholar, to try to keep things accurate. As far as Christ goes, any words that Christ speaks in these books are directly from Scripture. I didn't put anything in Christ's mouth. Everything was word for word, which is very challenging and very interesting, because when you do that, you're writing word for word what he says, but you're also writing on the peripheral what people are experiencing, hearing it, what they're seeing, smelling, the sights, this setting. It actually worked out really well for me with these books. The other characters, like I said, you can make an educated guess. We know I had a great fun writing the scene of Nicodemus sneaking down to see Jesus in the lower city at night. I put him in the lower city, which was kind of the slums of Jerusalem at the time. He was hanging out with the common men, in these books, Jesus is a little bit different in appearance. I don't do a lot of description, but I kind of make him very much like what a common man would have looked at. He's definitely not your typical surfer Jesus in these books. A little bit rougher, but
no blonde hair, blue eyes. Come on,
no blonde hair, blue eyes. But yeah, and then also to keep things culturally accurate, with the Jewish culture of the day, to keep things culturally accurate. There's several scenes where you get pretty deep into some Jewish culture. And then it's just historically accurate with what's going on with Rome, how the Sanhedrin worked, the kind of inner mechanisms of the society. So I think I haven't had any complaints yet about the accuracy of the book, which is great. And just let me say this: I watched The Chosen, screaming and kicking. I just finished the list when I even heard of the first book, when I heard about The Chosen, and I'd been studying so deeply about and so. Being so dedicated about keeping things accurate. And my wife wanted to watch this show she'd heard about. And I was like, I can't do it, man. I'm going to be a total jerk. I'm going to pick the thing apart. So I went in, because that's just my nature. I went into it with that mindset. And about halfway through the first episode, I was just thinking, man, this is pretty fantastic. I think God's going to use this in a pretty mighty way. Yeah. And there's a lot of things in that aren't accurate. But I think, Jerry Jenkins makes it pretty clear that that's not what they're going for there, and Dallas Jenkins. And I've heard amazing stories of people, digging deeper and discovering a deeper walk with Christ because of the way God's using that show. But, and hopefully he'll use the list in the light the same way. I don't know. I've had a great letters and emails of people, kind of encountering Christ in a deep and profound way through the book. So it's awesome.
Yeah. And I think it can be very, very healthy, should be, because the wonderful thing about historical fiction, and that's one of my favorite genres, whether it was, I really enjoy a lot of the Nazi Germany kind of stuff, especially during the 30s. Owen Dempsey has a great series out now that takes place in early Nazi Germany. And here's the reason why. Not because I'm trying to study. I've read The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. I've read several of these, so I've done sort of the study part of that time period and the events. But when you start to, even if it's fictionalized, you start to get into characters, because when the fiction like yours is rooted in accuracy, we're just kind of putting a face onto a time so that we can relate to it better, and you start to think of it differently. So when you go back and look at the facts, in our case, to read the scripture, you see it in, I think, a more realistic light in a lot of ways, a more relatable light, certainly.
Great word.
Yeah. So, I mean, has that been sort of your experience as you've gone through some of these thought exercises and character building and creating dialogue while doing the research and not tampering with the factual side of things?
Yeah. I mean, there's a craft to writing a book. So there's some of it that you're kind of nuts and boltsing, but then there's also, when you start to dig into characters for me become very real. I think a lot of writers would say that. They have a lot of writers that I'm sure if they admitted it, have conversations with characters in their heads as they're just, kind of wandering through this weird world of fiction. But I think for me, there were surprises for me in this book, that I encountered as I wrote it. And I have this thought, if you are arm in arm with Christ as you walk through the world, and that's our hope, even as you're creating art, I think that you have to say, well, some of this must be somewhat inspired, I hope. And so there, and those moments that are a little bit surprising, maybe that's where that's coming from. Maybe you're learning something, maybe it's a spiritual exercise as well as a mental exercise. But for some of the things were easy in approach. I wanted to show the prophecy, the Old Testament prophecy. There's an intellectual approach to the realization that Christ was Messiah, is alive. Lee Strobel's Case for Christ, it's a great example of that. This intellectual approach. That's what the first book was kind of about, and that's why I liked it. I'm out kind of talking a lot about the second book. I felt like the prophetic in the books, Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus both are scholars, and they begin this debate kind of looking through all this prophecy to come to the intellectual realization that, man, this guy has to be the guy. There's no other explanation for what's happening. That's not the case for everybody. I mean, I think that there are times and people, and in my life that I know, I've been too broken to put words together on a page to make an intellectual decision. Mm-hmm. And I love the fact that God is a personal God and a personal Savior. He will meet you where you are. And so in the second book, I wrote a character. Her name's Sister. She's a prostitute in the lower city, and not a scholar, she's very crusty. She's very hard. She's so inconsequential. She doesn't even have a name. She's just a tool to be used to make money. And so I wrote her character, and it's interesting, out of these books, she's the character I get mail from, mail about. She's the one that people relate to, because men and women, they say, that's my story. That's where I was when God met me. I couldn't say 2 + 2 is 4 on a page, but I know that when I was at my most crushed, that's when God shows up on the dark parts of the road. And so that's what I really, really enjoyed about the second book, The Light.
Very cool. Very cool. The Light is available now. In fact, you can go to Buck's website and see all of his books, buckstorm.com. There's the expanded version of The Light there. He talks about, as well as Venus Sings the Blues, which is another new offering, and a little bit different. Could you give us a little bit of an overview of that, just so people get a kind of wider view of some of your work?
Sure. Venus Sings the Blues. Most of it takes place at a little motel in the deserts of southeastern Arizona called the Venus Motel and the Venus Lounge. And the story opens with a biker pulling out of the desert and a 15-year-old kid that's kind of a foster kid working at the motel, sweeping the sidewalks, and their encounter. And this biker he's a blues piano player that gets a job at the Venus, and he's got a box that if you put anything in it, it disappears forever and nobody can figure it out. And a lot of strange and interesting characters show up at the Venus, kind of built around this box and this experience. And it's an interesting ride. It's a little bit film noir, a little humorous, but a little bit of depth in there too, and very interesting characters. They're very interesting characters to hang out with. I enjoyed it for a year. So
nice. So do you play the blues or do you play the piano? What is there a connection there?
I've been a songwriter for years. I made my living as a musician for forever. So I do still play music quite a bit, but I'm not really a blues man, but I thought that it was a great was a great place for this guy to speak from. So
all right. I love the fact that you're not formulaic in your approach. I think it's more relatable for a lot of people. I'm curious of some of your influences, whether they're film or, because you mentioned film noir, or writing. What do you like to watch? What do you like to read?
Oh gosh, I love Irish literature.
Really?
I love Irish books. Yeah, that's something I do. For some reason, Roddy Doyle is one of my favorite writers.
Nice.
I'm gonna, for a Christian audience, take all this with a grain of sand. You don't want to jump in if you're going to be easily offended. But Roddy Doyle, I think there's a book out called or an Irish novel called Eureka Street. I thought was one of the most amazing books I've read. It's another Irish writer, William McLean Wilson. I can't remember his name, but I have a good friend that's a literary professor in Montana, and we trade a lot of books. He's Irish, and he kind of turned me on to a lot of this stuff. But I grew up reading every possible Louis L'Amour book
Nice.
you could get, the covers with a flashlight at night.
Yep.
And love Hemingway is one of my favorites. Salinger, I think Salinger's 9 Stories is a great piece of work. Gosh, I don't know, the list goes on and on. I love to read, and I have a pretty wide taste. Just pretty much anything that I get my hands on, I can read it and find something in it to enjoy. Same with movies, I rarely watch a movie that I don't love. I have 2 little granddaughters now, so I've been watching a lot of the old Disney stuff or whatever for kids, and even that stuff, I'm like, man, I love this. I love good storytelling. It's just I love the craft of it.
So here's a question not a lot of people can answer off the top of their heads. I'll try it with you. What's your favorite film noir film?
Oh gosh, it's hard to beat Hitchcock.
Is that really noir? Because I think
I would think it would be noir. If you go like maybe Raymond Chandler stuff would be a little bit more of that genre. Which also, that's another guy I love to read, Raymond Chandler. But I don't know. I think I would call that noir, but I don't know. I could be wrong. Who knows? Rear Window. Lady Van.
The Third Man, I think, is a classic. And then the other one, the name is slipping away from me, but it takes place in Laredo, Texas, on the border. And it's...
Yes. I know what movie you're talking about.
The Citizen Kane guy.
Orson Welles?
Yeah, Orson Welles. On the border.
I know the movie. Man, you know what? I saw that not more than a couple years ago, too, and I can't remember him. I'm blanking out.
Yeah, then that to me is pretty classic film noir.
Yeah. And I would say so when I say film noir, that's a little darker than what I'm writing, but you kind of get the story, element in those, older movies, man. They're just great stories. They don't rely on a lot of gimmicks, and I just love that stuff.
All right. Very, very fun. Okay. But these are some of my favorite interviews. I like talking about a lot of the other things too, but this we could go on and on and on. Because it sounds like we could share reading lists, because Hemingway is one of my favorites too, and I grew up reading Louis L'Amour. But we will spare the audience all of that, and I will give you the last word, whether you want to talk about the book or just your philosophy in life. I'll let you close it out, and appreciate your time. And I hope some people will watch this and go, I'm going to check out one of his books, whether it's Venus Sings the Blues or The Light, or any of the other ones you've got at buckstorm.com. But last word to you.
Yeah, well, let me say this. I as far as the last word goes, I've spent most of my life being a pretty horrible cultural Christian, I would say. I don't seem to fit into the Christian culture that well, but I was just talking to my wife about this yesterday. The one constant I have found to be true from the time I was a child into now, which is obviously not a child, is that Jesus has been faithful. Mm-hmm. And I've walked through some pretty weird places in my life, especially as a musician and travel in the world. We've been everywhere, and always found that God has been there by my side, even when I didn't deserve it. And I think if you take a look at the light, especially in light of today's culture, when people are so lost and so broken, our daughters are taking their clothes off on TikTok, and our sons are walking into schools with guns, just to say, hey, I exist. The fact that we do exist to Christ is miraculous and wonderful and never ending. And so that's what I just want to tell the world. My experience has been that God has been faithful to me, man. And God, just the fact that he recognizes me and he knows me, and he knows me intimately. And if anybody, this is just me, this is you, anybody listening right now, if somebody knows you intimately, you really don't deserve to be recognized. If they see the dark things in your pocket, but God, he is love, and he is the only answer in today's world. And so that's what I wanted to say with this book. That there is hope and there is a future.
Yeah. The book is The Light. You can get it where you get books, buckstorm.com, as well as Venus Sings the Blues and a lot of other good ones. Check out one of them. If you enjoy his style and his dialogue and his characters, then there's others for you to get. And when you do that, I am big on this. Buck's certainly not asking me to do this, but I really think if we want to see more good fiction, more good movies, more good TV series that give the message that Buck just laid out, love of God, we need to support each other in those endeavors. So whether you are a fiction person or not, go buy some, give them to someone you know. Appreciate you guys being here. By the way, Touch of Evil is the movie I was talking about. If you like a little film noir.
Oh, Touch of Evil. That's right. Good job.
and check it all out. We will see you again next time here on Life Today Live.
In spite of our rebellion, in spite of our sins, in spite of our failures, God says, I love you. I love you.